Thanks again for staying with us on the program this morning on ITV. We call it TMI, and we'll go right into the heart of the show today. One video trended all through the weekend. Incidentally, that video was a pullout from a meeting our state governor had with some stakeholders, and he had to come all out to be as real as possible as it relates to the state of the Nigerian economy. And the shocking story, or the shocking part of that video that has been trending online, is that for the month of March, the federal government needed to print between 50 to 60 billion naira to top up before states could get allocation. In other words, the money is not there. For the labor unions who are agitating one way or the other, promises will be made. But apart from making those promises, the most important part of it all is that the promises are fulfilled. And so we're probably going to see promises being made and all of that. And then in addition to that, you also have the challenge of a growing debt profile. I mean, we're just borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, and the reasons for this are not far-fetched. So in today's program, our analysis is going to be on what options are there, especially at the sub-national governance level, to deal with dwindling revenues, to make life more meaningful for the people. Well, the major thrust of such a discussion is the need to have powers divulged to the sub-national level, that is the states. I'd like to thank very specially an international trade policy lawyer who is a former executive chairman of Edo State Internal Revenue Service. I'd like to thank very specially Dr. Ese Owe. Doc, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Give us your preview of the state of the Nigerian economy as relates to revenue inflows, because a lot of us believe that Nigeria is a blessed country, Nigeria is a rich country. I mean, we have an avalanche of resources to tap from, but unfortunately that's not reflected in the life of the ordinary man, particularly this time we're in now. It's as though things are more critical than they were in the past. So let's get to take on this.
I think there are two things. Reality and the superstitious belief, right? As the senator said a few years ago, we are superstitious people in the sense that we think that we are a wealthy country. In reality, we're a very poor country by GDP and by revenue inflows. So while potentially we've got both the human capital and abundant material resources to develop, but as things stand today, Nigeria is not in a good shape. With COVID and the plummeting of oil prices last year, we went into hemorrhage, so to speak. And you could see from the gale of borrowings that we actually embarked upon over the last couple of years. So from 2015 till date, we've had two recessions. We've got hyperinflation. We've got two devaluation of the Nigerian currency. And as we speak, they are still devaluing through the back door. So all things considered, the economy is in very poor shape. Oil prices are not stable. The world is transitioning to renewable energy. So investment in fossil fuels is dropping drastically, and as you can see, most of the IOCs are exiting, they are selling off their assets. So when you look at this holistically, you need not be a soothsayer to realize that we are in their economic situation, and we must begin to think outside the box to actually ensure that beyond just generating revenue, we must diversify our income base. We must diversify the economic dynamics that actually drive revenue generation. We cannot rely on oil. By the end of this decade, it is inevitable the world is going to shift drastically from fossil fuels. Question is, are we ready?
Big question, begging for a big answer. Okay, now, you have several opportunities you've had. You talked about the need to the need for us to have devolution of powers. That will help to fast track development in the states. But on the flip side, there's a feeling that if the states would judiciously deploy the resources they've had over the years, perhaps this scenario wouldn't have arisen. Do you subscribe to this?
I think there are also two distinct issues here. You've got the argument for the devolution of powers. We don't have a federal system in reality. What we still have is the hang-up from the military, where you had a very, very heavy center, and subnational entities masquerading as federating units. I use the word masquerading because, yes, by the Constitution, they call them federating units. But when you tell a state governor that he has no powers to give instructions to the Commissioner of Police, and the Commissioner of Police tells you, I do not report to the state governor, I report to the IG and the CNC. So there's some sort of tension in that way. So yeah. For devolution of powers, the argument is simple. You cannot sit in Abuja and tell Edo how to administer primary health care. You cannot sit in Abuja and tell Delta how to administer basic education. In more advanced economies, these are the decisions of the local councils, the lower rungs of the ladder: education, healthcare, sanitation, water, and all of these things. So we must begin to rethink the current governance structure of the country. You cannot have a government regulating up to permits for seaports, which is in your own, territorial waters of the state. So Delta, Edo, Bayelsa, Akwa Ibom. You want to do a deep sea port, you need to go through the Ministry of Transport and get all of these approvals from Abuja. So we must say, devolve these powers to the subnational governments, which are closer to the people. Yeah. And then devolve more to the local governments, which actually should take care of the basic necessities of the people. So I think that argument has been made very eloquent. We need not rehash that. The question is, how do we go about the process of devolving power? Simple answer. You need an overhaul of the Constitution, because unless the current Constitution is amended in such a manner as to reflect the aspirations of Nigerians to have a weaker center and more powerful and more impactful subnational entities, then nothing would happen. So the question then is the National Assembly, as currently constituted, able to actually kickstart that process, given the fact that whoever is president or the executive arm may not want to let go of the enormous powers they control. Yeah. But that said, subnational governments also have a duty and responsibility to deliver on their mandate to their people. And that is where the economic governance issue comes into play, because you then have to say, as a state government, how can I actually, within my regulatory competence, how can I actually take steps to actually better the lot of my people? So while we are pursuing the issue of devolution of powers, restructuring, and whatnot, resource control and what have you, we must begin to rethink what is the best model for subnational governments to develop their states. And examples abound all over the continent. From Nairobi to Gauteng province in South Africa to Cairo, you have city-states within national entities actually asserting themselves with a view to actually institutionalizing economic policies that will better their people. I think conversations are on, and the key question is, how do we actually do this in an efficient and effective manner?
Okay, just before we talk about that, I raised the question of judicious deployment of resources by the states as one of the major challenge, why the issue of revenue is always there. Do you subscribe to that? I think in terms of revenue, I had a good fortune of leading the Edo Revenue Service for a couple of years. You cannot actually generate revenue in the absence of transparency and taxpayers' confidence. Mm-hmm. There are two issues. So for the most part, taxpayers want to see what you're actually doing with their tax collections.
So that's why you find that in North America, in Europe, in Asia, they have no qualms paying their taxes, because it's from your property taxes, you pay for your refuse, from there they pave your roads, you do all of those things. From your income taxes, it covers your social security, it covers your health insurance and whatnot. So to the extent that a lot of state governments are not willing to be transparent, they also are not also willing to stake the required political capital to actually collect taxes. So for me, revenue generation is a two-pronged issue. You must first stimulate domestic production, because taxpayers would only pay taxes when the local economy is working. So for me, the major issue, before we delve into the issue of revenue generation, is that subnational government must stimulate the local economy, provide the key enablers for development, and then give its residents and indigenous and citizens the environment to thrive, grow their businesses, and that way you can tax them. So the question for us is, how do subnational entities actually do this effectively so as to give the residents of the various states a platform to grow, and then you can then tax them?
Okay. Where we are right now is that, I mean, judging from the statement by Governor Godwin Obaseki, a stage will come where perhaps the exchange rate between the dollar and the naira could be in the region of maybe 1,000, all right, against the background of the way things are. So the question has always been, and it still is, what options are there for states to survive without running to Abuja to get their monthly allocation? Do the states have the capacity, from the analysis that you have given, to be able to have that quantum of generation to survive?
I think, personally, it's about being creative. Take Edo, for instance. Edo is a model case of how subnational governments can actually stimulate production and stimulate economic growth. I mean, I happen to teach infrastructure policy, which I've done over the last 15 years. And I typically use Edo as a case study from 2000 and maybe 10, over the last 10 years. Subnational governments are body corporates with perpetual succession, so they can actually go to the markets and raise money. They can actually engage investors, local and foreign. So take Edo, for instance. The Edo Azura project was totally state-led. The Osiomo IPP was state-led in conjunction with the private sector. I'm aware the governor has said he's reached financial close on the Gele port, which means that he's got the funds in place from the private sector to kickstart Gele. You've also seen a lot of investments in the entertainment sector. I know he's doing a digital park somewhere. Point is, how do subnational governments utilize their powers as a government to engage the private sector and the third sectors as normal businessmen would do? So you do not need to wait. So regardless of the argument about devolution of powers, constitutionally, nobody can circumscribe the powers of subnational governments to embark in economic diplomacy and economic affairs across borders. So Lagos State, for instance, had to access a facility of about $120 million from the French Development Agency about 2 years ago to fund the Lagos mass transit system to buy the buses. It was a totally subnational government-led initiative. Yeah. So I think it's about thinking outside the box and begin to be innovative and say, you know what, while we are waiting for IGR to grow, how can we engage with development partners? How can we engage with the private sector? How can we engage with, portfolio investors to actually drive development in the state? And that goes back to the point I raised earlier. You must create a platform that gives both private investors and your residents a reason to want to do business and thrive. And I think if you look at from Canada, where you have the guys in Quebec asserting themselves within the Canadian Federation, to Kenya, to South Africa, you have subnational entities actually engaging in active economic affairs and economic relations without waiting for the center. And while the argument can be made that the federal government can actually, throw spanners in the works, but when you are foresighted and you have a team that is working, you can actually do these things, and there are results to be shown, and all over the continent, these things are being done. So the thing for me is that our state governors must realize that certain things are not rocket science. You can actually achieve these things without waiting for Abuja to give you a handout. And that is the argument we've made over the years, that subnational governments actually have the competence to do all of these things. And examples abound, even within Nigeria. From Edo to Akwa Ibom, where they have a new airline, they are doing an IPP. To Lagos, where they did the first IPP in 1999 or 2000. They are doing another one now. They are doing the Fourth Mainland Bridge, which is largely private sector funded. So you can see these activities being done without them waiting for the federal government. So I think it's doable. It's just about having the right mix of policy guys and actually putting the right framework to drive the delivery.
Fantastic. Let's talk about how resource control can help to drive this. Because in my opening statement, we have these resources locked up in different parts of the country, but harnessing them, accessing them is always a challenge. Oil and gas is mostly abundant in the south, particularly the south-south, maybe part of southwest, but accessing it is a major challenge, and that seems to bring some sort of hostilities every now and then. How do you think implementing a policy on resource control will help to, checkmate this financial challenge that the country is in now?
For me, I think it goes beyond the issue of simplistic resource control. There's a history to that. In 1963, the 63 Constitution had 50% resource control. When we still
50%?
Yeah. When we still had groundnut pyramids, when we had cocoa and all of these things. And by the time we struck oil, oil was struck in Oloibiri in 1958. So by 63, it still wasn't clear what we were doing with oil.
Yeah.
But by the time we got to the Second Republic in 79, we had actually passed the oil boom, where we said we had so much money, we just didn't know what to do with the money. So by 79, the resource control issue became a bit political, and it remained political till date. If you recall, in 99, we had the resource control fight between the littoral states, the oil-producing states, and the federal government. And Obasanjo said he had a political solution to it. Key issue for me is, leave the resource control issue alone. Let's devolve powers. Make the center weak and say, look, whatever you have in your territory, keep it, develop, center will tax you. Or better still, what percentage do you want to give to the center? Yeah. But for me, over and above that, subnational governments, regardless of how the resource control debate goes, must develop their productive capabilities, strengthen the public sector, strengthen public financial management, strengthen transparency, discipline. Because at the end of the day, you give 70% whatever to states that are not organized, nothing would still happen. So while as a Southerner, I'm an Edo man, while as an Edo man, I want Edo to have control of the oil in Ologbo, in Oben, in Ajakuruma, in Kolokolo, in Ajoki, in Ikoroga. I have no problem with that. But looking at the larger Niger Delta question, we must look at the sustainability of the oil sector management. And that goes beyond the percentage. At the heart of the issue is the issue of sustainability management and also the issue of transparency and accountability. But that said, I believe that the time has come for us, through the constitutional amendment provision, to look at the issue of resource control holistically. Jonathan tried to do it in his political reform conference, and certain decisions were reached, but unfortunately the current administration has managed to keep that report in the coolers. But we are hoping that at some point we would have the opportunity to actually look at the issue of resource control management holistically, then give to subnational governments the right to manage those resources, while the center plays the supervisory role of just taxing and providing institutional governance architecture to get this working.
Are you concerned by the reasoning that any attempt to go the way of devolution of powers could strengthen the secessionist agenda?
I disagree. I'm an international lawyer, and one of my very first academic papers was on the issue of Biafra. When you look at the right to self-determination in international law, what the position in public international law is that self-determination within nationally defined borders is not generally accepted in international law. So when you have a peaceful country and you have ethnic militias trying to assert themselves, you do not actually want them to break up. But that said, I do not think that from IPOB to the guys in Oduduwa to the guys in the north actually are being driven by an essential whatever to break up Nigeria. That is not what I think. So on the devolution of power issue, what we are saying is that we do not want Nigeria to disintegrate. We want Nigeria to remain as one. That's me speaking as a person. But let us take powers away from the center. You cannot have an exclusive legislative list that is so lopsided, right, that now gives the state government little or no powers over issues that ordinarily should be within their purview.
Okay.
So for me, I do not really want to focus on the secessionist guys. No. Let's look at the polity called Nigeria. It is not structured in a manner that is sustainable. And the only way to do that is to take what we call the 1999 Constitution and say, look, this document does not work. How do we do it in such a way that we have a federation in the real sense, not a unitary system that we currently run? And I think when that is done, the issue, the agitation for let's do Oduduwa, let's do Biafra, let's do Arewa, I think that would actually fizzle out naturally.
Thank you very much. If you just join us, it's TMI Monday, and I've been talking with Dr. Ese Owea, who is an international trade policy lawyer, giving us insight into the current economic quagmire where states are increasingly finding it difficult to meet their obligations to their citizens against the background of dwindling revenue, with the price of oil not being stable. Today is high, tomorrow is low. You can't really tell how it's going to be in the next 24 hours. And again, the oil majors are pulling out, particularly from Nigeria. Talk about Shell, talk about Chevron, and several of them. So what options are there? States needs to be more creative if they must find a way out of this economic situation. But let me come back to you. Do you think that the handlers of the Nigerian economy at the moment are doing a pretty good job against the background of where we are? Could it have been better if we had someone like Dr. Konjo Iweala on board? I'd like to get your perspective on this.
No, I don't think we should resort to personalizing this.
Okay.
Question is the economy in a good shape? No. Could the job could they have done the job in a better way? Absolutely, yes. I believe that the economy has not been managed properly. And the truth is,
if the economy has not been managed properly, two recessions.
And two recessions,
yes,
occasioned by oil price crashes, back to back.
Yeah.
But we've not managed to use our monetary policy levers well. We've not managed to use our fiscal policy levers properly. And when you have inefficient monetary policy, inefficient fiscal policy, and unfortunately for us, we don't even have a trade policy framework, it then means that you're actually heading into doom. So for me, it is not irredeemable. We just need to tell ourselves the truth. So window dressing the issue that things are fine, Abuja tells you, oh, things are fine, I think they are playing the ostrich. Things are not fine, things are not being done properly, and the earlier we wake up and smell the coffee, the better for all of us. I think that's why Governor Obaseki made the statement he made. He wasn't attacking anybody. For him, it was a cry that, look, we are heading to Golgotha, and we must, as a matter of urgency, begin to rethink the way things are being done. And that is my own view, and that the current system is not working. And it's not because of Mr. A or Mr. B or Mr. C. It's just about the fact that the systemic issues have not been fixed.
Okay, let's talk about the nagging issue of corruption. The ordinary man in the street believes that if that is adequately taken care of, perhaps there will be more money. Because in Nigeria, you wake up every day to hear a new story about who has stolen this or that, and in most cases These are in the billions. I'd like to get a perspective on this.
Personally, I don't think our problem is corruption. I think ours is the leadership problem. Because the word corruption is not indigenous to any African language. So there is no direct translation for the word corruption in Edo or in Benin or in Igbo or in Hausa. So what does that tell you? That the English people who gave us the English language actually had an idea of what corruption is. And I have lived and worked in across 5 continents, to be honest. So I can also tell you for free that everything we talk about in Nigeria is same in Asia, is same in Europe, is same in North America, everywhere. For me, we need to strengthen our institutional mechanisms and make people accountable. The reason why people act with impunity in Nigeria is that they are fully aware and confident that nothing would happen. So unless we have a system that actually penalizes bad behavior, penalizes corporate governance infractions, penalizes diversion of funds, nothing will change. But over and above that, we must begin to promote efficiency. Once you have an efficient system, you automate, you reduce human interference, things would work. That is the truth. So for me, focusing on corruption is focusing on the wrong issue. Because if you take maybe ITV and you fully automate the process, that from a dashboard, you can see requisitions for coverage, adverts and all of that, cut off cash payment, you cut off a lot of stuff, automate audit. There will be no corruption because from a touch of a button, you have the entire flow covered end to end. So we need to get to that stage. So focus for me, corruption is not the issue. It's everywhere. I mean, you see guys in Asia, Alibaba, the guys who do the e-commerce giant in China, they were just fined $4.1 billion for anti-competitive behavior. So Alibaba is not Nigerian. Yeah. They are Chinese. And it happens everywhere. You looked at the dot-com bubble. You looked at Arthur Anderson, all of these guys. There are infractions everywhere. So for me, what I think we should be looking at is how do we make the system effective, efficient, and transparent? And it goes back to the issue of institutional governance, putting the right institutions, strengthening the judiciary, strengthening law enforcement, and all of those things. And when you put those things in and you plug in, you realize that corruption would naturally fall to the barest minimum.
To what extent do you think the process of emergence of leadership is contributing to this parlous state of things in Nigeria?
I think, good question. And one of the problems really is that we have a political process that has a predilection or proclivity for settling for mediocres, right? So we actually would sit down and say, oh, for this role, who can we use? Who is more malleable? Who is pro the establishment? And it's not really peculiar to Nigeria, but I think for us in Africa, the main problem is the process leading up to the selection of party candidates is heavily manipulated by political leaders across party lines. So it's not peculiar to any party. But what could be done is to actually enlighten people that there is actually a need, that public service is not for personal aggrandizement, it's not for personal satisfaction. We must begin to expand the political space and give an incentive to the best and brightest to want to come in. Because I was telling someone a few weeks ago, in England, for instance, there are two, the Oxford-Cambridge Club, typically. Oxford produces the political guys, prime ministers and whatnot. And Cambridge would produce guys for the civil service. So you want to sue under secretary this, they are ex-Cambridge. It's also not an accident that you've had what? Oxford produced about 29 prime ministers over the last 100 years. It's not an accident. It's a deliberate, policy of the policy guys to say we want the best and brightest. It's the same in the US. In fact, as a matter of fact, Joe Biden is actually, I think, the first president in the last, I think, post the World War that was not Ivy League educated. It's been Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Harvard, Princeton in the US. It's also not an accident.
Okay.
It's also a deliberate, effort by these guys to say we want the best and brightest. So for me, we must begin to think along those lines to say, how do we attract the most competent and the most qualified people, give them incentives to want to come and serve. And most importantly, we should refrain from manipulating the system in such a way that people just see politics. I can't have a career somewhere. Let me just go and contest for council or contest with local government chairman. And I think that's part of the problem.
Okay, let's look at another nagging issue. The rate of borrowing in Nigeria is now in geometric progression against the background of the numbers that are coming in. Economically speaking, it's not wrong to borrow, right? So what is wrong with the complaints that are coming forth about Nigeria debt profile is increasing, we're borrowing both internal and external funds?
I think the issue is nuanced empirically, right? First issue for some of us is that China has embarked on a new form of colonialism in Africa. So from Kenya to Ethiopia
to Zambia,
these guys are aggressively investing via loans and concessionary whatever in national governments. Their strategy is to become the dominant foreign power on the continent. Not a bad idea. But for us in Nigeria, the key issue is we also do not have adequate debt structuring capabilities. So the fear for some of us is that these debts may be odious in the long term, right? And if you are not careful, you would end up ramping up such a debt profile that in the next 25 years, we may go back, we may become like Argentina, right? So the question for me is, do we really need these concessionary loans? First. Second, are they being used judiciously? Because borrowing in itself is not a problem. It's only when you borrow needlessly that it becomes a problem. So everyone is apprehensive. I mean, we've done, I think in the last 5 years, Nigeria has done about 20-something billion dollars in foreign loans. And the worry for some of us is that this borrowing is not sustainable. We need to rethink the projects we are using them for. We need to be sure that the terms are not unduly skewed against us. And most importantly, we need to ensure that we are getting value for money. So I share the apprehension that the borrowing spree is actually worrying, most especially because we are not producing. So you are borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. You are not stimulating domestic production. That is the problem.
We had a recent incident where borders were closed. This came heavily with criticisms from all sides. Were you comfortable with that decision on the part of the federal government?
That's a tough question. Personally, no. And the border closure for me had two dimensions. First, for me as an international trade lawyer, it was in clear violation of our regional and continental commitments. So within the ECOWAS sub-region, we've actually signed up to the protocol of free movement of goods, persons, capital, and all of that. And I don't know if you're aware, we have a new agreement called the African Continental Free Trade Area, which Nigeria also signed up to, which also seeks to liberalize the movement of persons, capital, labor, and all of that stuff. So for me, the fact that we've brazenly, violated our commitments at the regional level and continental level, and if you look at it properly, it was also in violation of our commitment to the WTO. That for me was an issue. But for me, the bigger issue was, why were the borders closed? What was the real economic benefit? And if you ask me, it was none. You said you closed the borders to actually, protect domestic industries. But after closing the borders, the bag of rice, jumped from, I think, 18,000 to about 40,000. So even the local rice you said you were closing the borders to protect was no longer cheap. So I just felt personally that the border closure was precipitated by certain business interests that actually sought to actually grow their bottom line. And it didn't paint us in good light. And if you read the papers, Economist, Times of London, over the last 1.5 years, it was constant bashing for Nigeria. And when you go on to the continental level, at the level of the African Union, it also bumped us to, I think, number 33 on the list of preparedness for the African single market. So I think such policies were designed for certain individuals as opposed to promoting our national interest.
We have oil majors pulling out investments in Nigeria. Aren't there supposed to be opportunities for local investors to bridge the gap?
I think the issue of the oil majors needs to be put in context. The oil majors are pulling out because the world is transitioning to renewable energy. So their argument is, we stay another 5 years and our assets will become obsolete. So it is strategic exits. There have been Nigerians who have acquired a few of these assets. But one word I have for them is also seek to diversify your portfolio, because oil, first, would not last forever. And secondly, even if you have oil for another 50 years, you must be ready for the energy transition. So I'm also aware that Shell is selling a new round of their blocks, same as Total. And I know Nigerian locals who are putting together bids for this project. And we also hope that that will actually stimulate domestic production. But over and above that, I think our thinking should be, how do we actually accelerate Nigeria's energy transition? And thankfully, the United States, led by Joe Biden, the issue of climate change and energy transition is big on Biden's agenda. So to that extent, you would have quite a bit of support in terms of technical capacity and funding to actually accelerate our energy transition. I think that should be our key focus, as opposed to focusing on fossil fuels that would go out of fashion in the next couple of years.
Let's come back to where we started from. Devolution of powers, strengthening subnational government to be able to live up to the expectations of the citizens. You said basically the states, they need to be more creative and look out for opportunities to do new things so as to revamp their economy and then increase revenue flow. You've also mentioned something that has to do with getting, for example, license to operate maybe a business as it relates to maybe any of the mining sectors, whether it's crude oil, whether it's gold. This has been of great concern. I'd like to get more elaborate, perspectives on that.
I didn't get the question well.
Yeah, the question is, you want to prospect for oil, for example. Yeah. The process is cumbersome. You want to prospect for gold. You want to prospect for maybe any of these natural minerals.
Yeah. It's about devolution. So oil is still controlled by the federal government, DPR. So only the DPR, an agency of government, would issue you a license for an OML or OPL, or even something as small as a service company. So those are part of the structural issues we need to fix. We need to actually take away resources management from the exclusive list of the federal government. So the argument was made that why would Zamfara control its gold and Delta cannot control its oil, or Edo cannot control its oil? These are the systemic issues we need to actually address by way of a constitutional amendment or an overhaul of the governance architecture of the country. So we cannot make progress on certain fronts if we do not address the issue of devolution of powers and restructuring. Unfortunately, when the APC government came in 2015, what they told us was, we would be big on restructuring, we'll be big on devolution. Nothing has happened in 6 years. the El-Rufai committee was set up by the APC to actually treat this issue, and I think nothing has still happened. So we are hoping, that in the coming years, we can actually sit down and have frank conversations around the issue of the current structure of Nigeria, which cannot engender sustainable development. We should not, dance around the issue. This current structure cannot work. But while we are waiting for that, like I said, subnational governments who actually have more responsibility towards its citizens must begin to fashion out, ways and means of actually engendering development. And like I said, examples abound, and thankfully Edo is doing it very well, and there's a clear trajectory for Edo on that score. You see a state where you have 2 IPPs on stream, a seaport, nearly commencing, and things going on which are being done, led by the state government in collaboration with development partners and portfolio investors. So I think other states should learn, and that this is doable. While we are doing the pull and push for devolution issue, we can also begin to think of how we can have an economic governance structure for the subnational governments that is workable.
How do we deal with the issue of diversification, which you talked about earlier, as a strategy the states can adopt to perhaps improve revenue inflows and all of that? Take, for example, agriculture. We're saying people should, explore the potentials in agriculture, and then you set up a farm. You go to that farm, and then some guys are waiting for you with AK-47 rifle. Sometimes you plant at the point of harvesting. These guys come in, and then they harvest it and use it to feed their cows. This is a nagging issue that is also putting spanners in the works of diversification, particularly as it relates to agriculture. What do you make of this challenge?
No, I think we should decouple the issue. The issue is how do states actually harness their potentials, right? So for me, you must know where you have comparative advantage. So Edo, for instance, is blessed. Edo has 2 of the country's leading agric research institutes. The one just around the corner, the Institute for Oil Palm Research, NIFO. The other one on the other side of the city, the Rubber Research Institute, Yanamo. We also have a river basin authority, the Benue River Basin Authority. So you needn't be a scientist, a rocket scientist, to know that we are blessed in the area of agriculture. And that actually is pretty much the case for most of the states in the southern parts. So from Edo to Delta to Bayelsa, we are blessed. What do you do is the question. How do you then use the current institutional mechanisms to actually stimulate investment in agribusiness? So you have the CBN that has quite a number of interventionist schemes, from the Anchors Borrower Scheme to the NISO Fund for investments, to the specific ones for different products, clothing. Clothing, you've got for clothing, you've got for wheat, you've got for sugar and all of these things. You then have to sit down as a state government to create a platform that brings investors, your residents or citizens together, and the state government to actually leverage these opportunities. It doesn't have to be at a big scale. So for smallholder farmers, the State Ministry of Agriculture or Wealth Creation can collaborate with the farmers and form the farmers can form cooperatives, interface with these relevant ministries and the state government, have them do some sort of guarantees or one of those things. Approach the Bank of Industry, Bank of Agriculture, SMIDAN, and approach these guys and say, we've got 10,000 smallholder farmers. We verify them. They are real farmers. They are not portfolio farmers. We know what they are doing. They each need about 50 million over the next 3 years. We know them. They are in our database. Give them this money. We can indemnify you if we need to. Yeah. So there are opportunities for doing all of these things. But because of the ease with which they go to Abuja and take their handouts, nobody wants to think inwards anymore. So that is what we are telling them, that you do not need to wait for Abuja. Begin to think inwards. In Ondo, for instance, you've got massive bitumen deposits. massive bitumen deposits. In the same Ondo, you've got massive marijuana deposits that can be used for cannabis. So you've got cannabis in Ondo, you've got cannabis in parts of Edo, you've got cannabis in Delta that can be used.
It's illegal.
No, it's not illegal. You can use, there's also a move globally to use it for treatment, for medical purposes.
Yeah.
So you need to begin to think, how can we unlock the endogenous potential of indigenous peoples? How can, so even Edo, for instance, look at the Edo creative industry. We've got a huge bronze casting industry. We've got a huge visual arts, performing arts. Even our gastronomy, our cuisine. I tell people, for instance, Edo exported our Izoko, the leaf rice. Today, you go for weddings in Lagos and in Abuja, they've converted that to ofada rice, our own food, which we exported. So I tell people, if Lyon, the city of Lyon in France, is known as the gastronomy capital of Europe, for doing what? Just food, fusion cuisine, this, that. So we must begin to think, how can we harness what we have? And it doesn't require you to do a lot of stuff. All you really need to do is to sit down, have the presence of mind and the clarity of thoughts to actually do the right things, create the enabling environment, provide the critical enablers for development, and things would happen. It happened in Lagos. Today, Lagos does about 26 billion a month from IGR. So the Lagos Commissioner of Finance doesn't know whether FAC is there, whether FAC comes or not. It's not his headache.
But Lagos has the advantage of being a former capital city.
I think that's besides the point. I mean, before 2003, Lagos did not generate the revenue. It's been former capital for what, since '63. So that argument is a lazy one, because before 2003, nothing happened in Lagos. Even in Edo, before 2009, Edo did not factor in IGR in its planning. We didn't factor in until I got there in 2009. We met revenues at about 300 million in 2009 April. And by 2009 December, we had hit $1 billion. So for me, it's a lazy argument. People would have said, oh, Edo had it before, but why didn't they collect? So the political will and the institutional mechanism to collect requires some sort of effort. And that effort must be put in by the subnational governments.
Would you subscribe to the position that the biggest challenge in Nigeria right now is not even the state of the economy, is insecurity? And how do you think that can be dealt with under the present circumstances?
Yes, I agree that insecurity is key, is an issue. But you cannot have security in the absence of economic prosperity. You need to go back to the history of Boko Haram and how it started in Borno. It was precipitated by inequality, poverty, illiteracy, and all of that. So for as long as we operate this hopelessly incompetent structure, this hopelessly oppressive structure, insecurity would continue. So the key thing for me is we must grow the economy while fighting insecurity. You cannot fight insecurity in isolation and have poverty. Poverty and security cannot coexist. The reason why you have crime is you have crime because people are idle. So that is why, for instance, in Lagos, you don't have high rates of crime in Ikoyi or VI or whatever. You find in Oworonshoki, in Shanghai, a lot of those places where you have boys who are idle. So it's a simple issue. We must grow the economy. We must trigger economic growth. And that way, when you get people off the streets, you get people busy, you then naturally bring down the crime rate. You cannot say, I'm going to curb crime, and you're not growing the economy. For me, it's just rhetoric, to be honest. It's rhetoric.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ese Owea. Always a delight to have you around, bring on board some very insightful perspectives on national and subnational issues. Well, thank you again for coming.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Hope we can have you here again some other time. Thank you.
Yeah, look forward to coming back soon.
Thank you. It's the TMI Monday. We'll take a short break and I'll be back with you with the rest of the program. Please don't go away.